Look at your driver's license right now. Go ahead, pull it out. I'll wait. Now, look at your name. Notice anything strange? It's in all capital letters. John Smith, Mary Johnson. Whatever your name is, it's written in all caps. Now, check your credit card, all caps. Your bank statements, all caps. Your bills, your insurance papers, your mortgage documents. Every single official document you own has your name written exactly the same way. All capital letters. You probably never thought about this before. Most people don't. And if you did notice it, you probably assumed it was just a formatting choice. Maybe it makes things easier to read. Maybe it's just how computers print things. Maybe it's a design standard for official documents. But what if I told you it's none of those things? What if I told you that this seemingly trivial detail, this formatting quirk you've seen your entire life and never questioned, is actually the most important clue to understanding your real legal status and rules? Society, what if the way your name is written is the difference between being a free human being and being property of the state? This isn't a metaphor. This isn't an exaggeration. And by the end of this investigation, you're going to see every document you've ever signed in a completely different light. Because what we're about to uncover is a legal system that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. A system that transformed free people into assets without them ever realizing it happened. We're going to follow a thread that starts with the letters of your name and ends at the foundations of Western civilization itself. And what we find there will change everything you thought you knew about freedom, citizenship, and your place in the legal order. But first, we need to understand why those capital letters matter. And to do that, we need to talk about something most people have never heard of: the difference between a living person and a legal person. In law, there's a concept that most people never encounter unless they go to law school. It's called legal personhood, and it's the key to understanding everything that follows. A legal person is not the same thing as a living, breathing human being. A legal person is a fiction, an artificial construct created by law that can hold property, enter into contracts, be sued, and bear legal obligations. Corporations are legal persons. Governments are legal persons. Even ships can be legal persons in maritime law. But here's where it gets interesting. You, the living man or woman reading this, and the legal person that bears your name are not the same entity in the eyes of the law. They are two separate things. One is flesh and blood, the other is a legal fiction, a kind of corporation created in your name. And the way the system distinguishes between these two entities is through the way the name is written. When your name appears in all capital letters, the legal system is not referring to you, the living human being. It is referring to the legal fiction, the corporate entity, the artificial person that was created to represent you in legal matters. This entity can be taxed, fined, imprisoned, and compelled to follow regulations. You, the living man or woman, cannot be, at least not directly. But the legal fiction can, and when you accept that legal fiction as your identity, you accept all the obligations that come with it. This seems absurd at first. How can the way a name is capitalized make any legal difference? But if you dig into legal dictionaries, old law books, and the actual rules governing how names appear in legal documents, a disturbing pattern emerges. In the style manual used by the U.S. Government Printing Office, corporate names are written in all capital letters. In shipping and maritime law, cargo is identified in all capital letters. In legal filings, the parties to a case are listed in all capital letters. The pattern is consistent. All caps identify something that is not a living being, but a legal construct, a piece of property, an object of commerce. Now look again at your driver's license, your social security card, your birth certificate. Every government document that identifies you uses this same format. The same format used for corporations, the same format used for cargo, the same format used for property. Why would that be? The standard explanation, if you can find anyone who even addresses this question, is that it's just for clarity. All caps makes names stand out. It's easier for computers to process. It's a holdover from typewriter days when you couldn't print lowercase letters as clearly. But that explanation crumbles under the slightest scrutiny. Modern printers have no problem with lowercase letters. Legal documents use mixed case for everything else: addresses, instructions, disclaimers. Only names are consistently rendered in all caps. And this practice didn't start with computers or typewriters. It goes back much further, to a time when every letter was painstakingly written by hand. Why would clerks and lawyers deliberately make extra work for themselves by capitalizing every letter of a name unless it served a specific legal purpose? The truth is, it does serve a purpose, a very specific purpose. It identifies the entity being addressed not as a living soul, but as a legal fiction under the jurisdiction of statutory law. And once that legal fiction is created, once you accept it as your identity, you step into a world of obligations you never agreed to. You become subject to regulations, codes, statutes, and administrative rules that were never designed to govern free men and women. They were designed to govern legal fictions, corporate entities, pieces of property. But this raises an even more disturbing question. If the all-caps name identifies a legal fiction rather than a living person, when was this fiction created? There must be a birth record for this artificial entity, some moment when it came into legal existence. And there is. It's a document you have probably seen dozens of times and never questioned. A document that sits in a filing cabinet or safe deposit box in millions of homes around the world. A document that everyone believes is simply a record of birth. But what if it's something else entirely? Pull out your birth certificate. Look at it carefully, not as a sentimental keepsake, not as a bureaucratic formality, but as a legal document. What do you actually see? First, notice the name. There it is again, in all capital letters. The legal fiction, identified from day one. But that's just the beginning. Look closer. Most birth certificates have a serial number printed on them. Some have multiple numbers, a registration number, a certificate number, a file number. Why would a simple record of birth need serial numbers? What is being serialized? Now look at the paper itself. If you have an official certified copy, notice the texture. It's not regular paper. It's bond paper, a specific type of security paper similar to what's used for stock certificates and treasury bonds, the same paper used for financial instruments. Why would a birth record be printed on bond paper? Here's where we enter territory that most people find difficult to accept, but the evidence is too consistent to ignore. There is a substantial body of research suggesting that birth certificates are not merely records of birth. They are financial instruments. They are bonds representing the future economic value of the person named on them. When a child is born, the birth is recorded and registered. Registered is the key word. In law, registration is not the same as recording. Recording simply means making a record. Registration means transferring title or ownership. When you register a car, you're not just recording that you own it. You're transferring the title to the state, which then grants you a license to use it. The same principle applies to birth registration. The child is registered, creating a legal entity, a corporate fiction in the all-caps name. This fiction is then bonded, assigned a number, and used as collateral. Collateral for what? For the national debt. The government, operating as a corporation, needs assets to borrow against. And in a system where gold and silver have been removed from circulation, where nothing has intrinsic value, the only real asset left is people. Specifically, the productive capacity of people, their future labor, their future tax, their future economic output. This sounds insane until you start looking at the numbers involved and the legal framework surrounding them. In the United States, there's a system called the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC. It's the body of law governing commercial transactions. And buried within it are provisions for something called a financing statement, or UCC-1 form. These forms are used to establish a security interest in property. They create a lien against assets. And researchers have discovered that for every birth certificate registered, there appears to be a corresponding entry in the UCC system, a financing statement filed against the all-caps name. Now, the government will tell you these are just administrative records, bureaucratic bookkeeping, but the structure is identical to how corporations securitize assets, identical to how loans are collateralized. The birth certificate creates the legal fiction. The UCC filing establishes the security interest, and the bonded debt is traded. Some researchers have gone further, claiming that these birth certificate bonds are actually traded on the stock market, that each person has a secret treasury account in their all-caps name holding millions of dollars. This is where the theory gets controversial, and where mainstream sources will tell you it's all nonsense. But whether or not there's a secret treasury account in your name, the fundamental structure is undeniable. The birth certificate is printed on bond paper. It has serial numbers, like a financial instrument. It's registered, not just recorded, and it creates a legal entity separate from the living child, an entity that can be used for commercial purposes. Think about what this means. From the moment you're born, a legal fiction is created in your image. This fiction bears your name, but in all capital letters. It can hold property, enter into contracts, and accumulate debt. And most importantly, it can be compelled, regulated, taxed, and controlled in ways that a living man or woman never could be. But here's the trap. Throughout your entire life, no one ever tells you about this distinction. You grow up assuming that your legal name and your identity are the same thing. When someone addresses you as John Smith, you respond, thinking they're talking to you. When you sign a contract, you sign it thinking you're binding yourself, the living person. But legally, you're not. You're acting as the representative of the legal fiction. You're the agent of the corporation. And every time you do this, every time you accept the all-caps name as your identity, you're confirming your role as the trustee of this legal entity. This is why you can be compelled to pay taxes on money you earned with your own labor. This is why you can be fined for victimless crimes. This is why you need a license to drive, to fish, to get married, to do anything. Not because you, the living man or woman, need permission, but because the legal fiction operates under statutory jurisdiction, and you've accepted the role of managing that fiction. The birth certificate is the genesis document. It's the moment the state creates its claim on you, or rather, on the commercial entity that will represent you for the rest of your life. And the all-caps name is how that entity is identified and distinguished from the living you. Now, this all seems like a modern invention, some scheme cooked up by 20th century bankers and bureaucrats. But the truth is far older and far more disturbing. This system didn't originate in America or in the modern era. It's the continuation of a legal framework that has existed for over 2,000 years. To understand where this really comes from, we need to go back to the source. We need to go back to Rome. The Roman Empire is taught to us as ancient history, a civilization that rose and fell millennia ago, leaving behind ruins and Latin phrases. But what if Rome never actually fell? What if it simply changed its form, adapted to new circumstances, and continued to govern the world under different names? This isn't speculation. It's a matter of legal record. The foundation of virtually every legal system in the Western world, and most systems beyond it, is Roman law. The European Union, the United States, Russia, most of Asia and Africa, all operate under legal frameworks derived directly from the corpus of Roman legal principles. And Roman law was designed for one specific type of society, a slave-owning society. This is not a metaphor. This is not an exaggeration. Roman law is explicitly a set of rules for managing a world in which owning human beings as property was the foundation of the economy. The law needed to distinguish between those who had rights and those who were property. It needed mechanisms for transferring ownership of people, for regulating their behavior, for extracting their labor. And all of those mechanisms still exist. They've just been repackaged with more palatable terminology. Let's start with the fundamental division at the heart of Roman law, the distinction between patricians and plebeians. The patricians were the elite, the noble families who possessed full rights by virtue of their bloodline. They were the lawgivers, the rulers, the owners of property, including human property. The plebeians were everyone else. They had limited rights, and those rights were not natural or inherent. They were granted by the state and could be revoked by the state. Plebeians lived under a different legal framework than patricians. They were subject to statutory law, the law of nations, while patricians operated under natural law. Now look at modern legal systems. Look at the distinction between human rights and civil rights, between a human and a citizen. This is the exact same division. If you read the constitutions and foundational legal documents of modern states carefully, you'll notice they use these terms differently. Some passages refer to the rights of humans or persons. Others refer to the rights of citizens. And sometimes they appear together, connected by the word, and, which grammatically confirms they are two different categories. A human being has natural rights. These are rights that exist prior to any government, inherent to existence itself. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. These are described as inalienable, meaning they cannot be transferred or surrendered. But a citizen has civil rights. These are rights granted by the state through the citizenship relationship. They can be regulated, limited, and revoked. And here's the key. Citizenship is voluntary. It's a contract. You agree to become a citizen, to accept the obligations and regulations that come with that status, and in exchange you receive certain privileges and protections. This is the modern version of the patrician-plebeian divide. The human is the patrician, possessing inherent rights by nature. The citizen is the plebeian, operating under statutory jurisdiction, granted limited rights by the state. And just like in Rome, the vast majority of the population exists in the lower category. We are citizens, not free men and women. We are plebeians, not patricians. We operate under statutory law, not natural law. The evidence for this is everywhere once you know what to look for. Consider the word referendum, the process by which citizens vote on laws or policies. The historical and still technically accurate name for this process is plebiscite, the vote of the plebs. By participating in an election or referendum, you are automatically identifying yourself as part of the plebeian class, the class subject to state authority. This isn't hidden, it's right there in the language, but we've been conditioned not to see it, to think of these as just neutral administrative terms rather than the legal classifications they actually are. And Rome's influence goes far beyond terminology. The entire structure of modern government is Roman. The symbols are Roman. The rituals are Roman. Even the titles of rulers reveal the truth. Look at the word Kaiser, the title of the German emperor. It's a direct derivation of Caesar. The Russian title Tsar, same thing, an adaptation of Caesar. For over 1,000 years, the rulers of Europe explicitly claimed the title of Roman emperor, asserting their right to govern as the heirs of Rome. The Russian Empire called itself the Third Rome. Moscow was to be the new center of Roman authority after the fall of Constantinople. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was official state ideology. And the ruling dynasty? The Romanovs. Literally, the Romans. The Holy Roman Empire, which dominated Europe from 800 AD until 1806, was the direct continuation of the Western Roman Empire. It claimed unbroken succession from ancient Rome. Even Napoleon, when he dissolved it, did so by declaring himself the new Roman emperor. And when Germany unified under Prussian leadership, they called their empire the Reich, which means empire or realm. When Hitler came to power, he explicitly called his regime the Third Reich, the Third Empire, the first being the Holy Roman Empire, the second being the German Empire of the Kaisers, and the third being his own, a direct assertion of Roman continuity. Rome never fell. It fragmented, reformed, and continued. The empire became the church. The church became the basis for medieval kingdoms. Those kingdoms became modern nations. But the legal structure, the social hierarchy, and the fundamental relationship between rulers and ruled remained Roman. And the clearest proof of this isn't in history books. It's in the symbols that surround you every single day. Walk into any courthouse in the Western world. Look around at the architecture, the decorations, the symbols carved into the stone or hanging on the walls. You'll see them everywhere. Bundles of rods with an axe in the center. This is the fasces, and it's one of the most important symbols in the Roman Empire. In ancient Rome, the fasces was carried by lictors, special attendants who accompanied high magistrates. The bundle of rods represented the power to administer corporal punishment, to beat citizens into compliance. The axe represented the power of capital punishment, the right to execute. The fasces was a symbol of state authority to use violence against the population. It was a threat made visible, a reminder that the magistrate had the legal right to hurt you or kill you if you disobeyed. And where do we see this symbol today? Everywhere. It's on the emblem of the Federal Penitentiary Service in Russia. It's carved into the walls of the U.S. House of Representatives, flanking the Speaker's podium. It's on French government buildings. It's woven into the decorations of parks and public squares across Europe and America. This isn't ancient history preserved for educational purposes. These are modern government institutions actively using a Roman symbol of violent authority as their emblem. They're telling you, in the most direct way possible, that they claim the same right the Roman magistrates claimed, the right to punish your body and take your life if you violate their rules. And the name of the political ideology that took this symbol as its central icon? Fascism, from the Latin fascis. Mussolini explicitly modeled his movement on ancient Rome, and he chose the fasces as his symbol because it perfectly represented what he believed government should be: authority backed by the threat of violence. But here's what should disturb you. That symbol didn't disappear after World War II. It's still there, still on government buildings, still on emblems and seals. The authority it represents never went away. Now look at another ubiquitous symbol, the scales. We're taught that scales represent justice, the impartial weighing of evidence and arguments. The goddess Themis holds scales, and we assume it's about fairness and balance. But in Roman law, scales had a very specific function. They were used in the ceremony of emancipatio, the legal transfer of ownership. When important property changed hands, a piece of copper or bronze was placed on a scale in front of witnesses. This formalized the transaction and established the price. And what counted as important property in Rome? Land, livestock, and slaves. The scales were used to weigh the payment for a human being. They were the instrument by which a person's value was determined, and ownership was transferred from one master to another. So when you see scales in a courtroom today, you're not looking at a symbol of impartial justice. You're looking at a symbol of property valuation. And the implication is clear. The person standing before the court is being weighed, assessed, and valued as property. This connects directly back to Roman legal procedure. In a Roman court, the defendant was often treated as an object of the law rather than a subject with inherent rights. The proceedings determined not whether the person had committed a moral wrong, but whether the property, the legal entity before the court, had violated the regulations governing its behavior. The same is true today. Modern courts don't primarily concern themselves with justice in the philosophical sense. They apply statutory law to legal fictions. They assess damages, determine liability, and enforce contracts. They weigh the value of the legal entity in the all-caps name against the obligations that entity has incurred. And the people operating this system, the judges and prosecutors, mark their status through another distinctly Roman symbol, the robe. In ancient Rome, only citizens, specifically free male citizens, were allowed to wear the toga. It was the mark of legal personhood, of having rights and standing in society. Slaves and foreigners were forbidden from wearing it. The toga candida, the pure white toga, was worn by candidates for high office, which is where we get the word candidate. When a judge puts on a robe today, they're doing exactly what a Roman magistrate did when they put on a toga. They're visually separating themselves from everyone else in the room. They're asserting a higher legal status, a patrician status. Everyone else in the courtroom, by default, is in the lower category, the plebeian, the citizen, the subject. You might be wondering, how can this be? How can modern democracies, countries that claim to have abolished slavery and established equality, still be operating under a slave-based legal system? The answer is simple and brutal. Slavery was never abolished. It was universalized. In ancient Rome, there was a clear line between the free and the enslaved. Patricians owned property, including people. Slaves were property and had no rights. Plebeians were in between, nominally free but subject to state authority. The genius of the modern system is that it eliminated the visible distinction. Everyone is now in the plebeian category. Everyone is a citizen, which sounds like an upgrade until you realize what citizenship actually means in legal terms. Citizenship is a contract between an individual and a state. By becoming a citizen, you accept certain obligations, to obey laws, to pay taxes, to serve in the military if called upon. In exchange, you receive certain privileges, access to services, legal protections, the right to vote. But here's the trap. The obligations are mandatory and enforceable. The privileges are conditional and revocable. You cannot simply decide to stop being a citizen without replacing that citizenship with citizenship in another state. You must always be owned by some government. Try it. Try to renounce your citizenship without acquiring a new one. You'll discover it's nearly impossible. The system will not allow you to be stateless, to exist outside of any jurisdiction. You must belong to a state. You must be governed. This is the legal equivalent of a slave market. You can change masters, but you cannot be masterless. You can transfer from one jurisdiction to another, but you cannot exist in a state of true sovereignty. And the mechanism by which this system captured you was the birth certificate. When you were born, your parents, likely having no idea of the legal implications, registered your birth. That registration created the legal fiction in your all-caps name. That fiction was bonded, and from that moment forward, you've been operating as the trustee of that fiction, accepting its obligations as your own. Every time you sign a contract, you sign it in that all-caps name. Every time you get a driver's license or a passport, You confirm your identity as the legal fiction, not the living man or woman. Every time you accept employment and sign a W-4 or W-9 form, you agree that the product of your labor belongs to the legal entity, and that entity's obligations, including taxes, are your responsibility. You were never told this was happening. You were never given a choice. The system was designed to make this capture automatic and invisible. And the historical precedent for this goes back to the very formation of modern states. In Imperial Russia, for example, there are documented decrees that explicitly describe this process. Peter the Great's decree of 1700 equated baptism in the Orthodox Church with entering into servitude to the sovereign. The decree stated that a person who was baptized became the property of the empire. Later, under Empress Elizabeth, foreigners who wished to become subjects of Russia were required to take an oath. The text of that oath survives, and it's chilling. The person swore to be a faithful, good, and obedient slave, and an eternal subject with all their descendants. Eternal. The oath didn't just bind the person taking it. It bound their children, their grandchildren, their entire bloodline in perpetuity. This wasn't citizenship in any modern sense. This was hereditary slavery, formalized through a religious or legal ceremony. Today, the language has softened. We don't say slave, we say citizen. We don't say oath of eternal servitude, we say pledge of allegiance. But the legal structure is identical. You are bound to the state. Your children are automatically bound to the state, and leaving requires permission. This is why people in the past resisted census taking so fiercely. They understood what it meant. Being counted, being registered, being put in the official records was the first step to being claimed as property. It wasn't paranoia. It was legal reality. And this brings us to a term that everyone thinks means one thing but actually means something very different: the word emancipation. In popular culture, emancipation means freedom. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. Emancipated minors gain independence from their parents. We think of it as liberation. But in Roman law, emancipation is a very specific procedure. It comes from the terms manus, meaning hand, and capio, meaning to take or seize. Mancipatio was the act of taking possession. Emancipation was the act of leaving one hand, one form of ownership. But here's the key. Emancipation never meant freedom in the absolute sense. It meant a transfer of ownership. A slave who was emancipated didn't become a free person in the way we understand freedom. They became a freedman, a legal category with its own restrictions and obligations. They left the household of their master, but fell under the jurisdiction of the state. Similarly, when a woman in Rome was emancipated from her father's authority, she didn't become independent. She either came under the authority of her husband or the state. The hand holding her simply changed. In modern terms, emancipation movements, whether for slaves, women, or colonies, didn't actually create freedom. They transferred people from private ownership to state ownership. They moved individuals from the authority of a master to the authority of the government. This is why, after the abolition of slavery in America, newly freed slaves were encouraged to become citizens as quickly as possible. Citizenship wasn't a gift. It was a new form of binding. Instead of belonging to a private owner, they now belonged to the state, subject to its laws, required to pay its taxes, compelled to accept its regulations. The same pattern played out globally. As empires dissolved and colonies gained independence, the populations didn't become free. They became citizens of new nation-states, new corporations with different names, but the same structure. You are emancipated. You're not under the direct authority of a king or a feudal lord or a private slave owner, but you are under the authority of the state. And the state exercises that authority through the legal fiction created in your name, the all-caps entity that exists on paper and in databases. That entity can be taxed without limit. It can be regulated in every aspect of its behavior. It can be imprisoned, fined, and even executed if it violates the rules. And because you accept that entity as your identity, all of this happens to you, the living person, even though legally it's happening to the fiction. This is the brilliance of the system. It doesn't need whips and chains. It doesn't need visible markers of servitude. It operates through paperwork, through registration, through identification documents. It makes you complicit in your own bondage by making you believe the legal fiction is you. And the final insult, The ultimate revelation of how deep this deception goes is hidden in the very name we call ourselves, the term we use to identify our species. Stand in front of a mirror and say it out loud. Human, Homo sapiens. We say it with pride, believing it means we are the wise species, the intelligent ones, the pinnacle of evolution. But what if that's not what it means at all? Latin is a precise language. It doesn't have the ambiguities and layers of metaphor that modern languages have developed. When a Roman used a word, they meant it literally. And if we look at the literal meaning of Homo sapiens, something very disturbing emerges. The word homo comes from humus, which means earth, soil, or dirt. A homo is an earthling, but not in the sense of an inhabitant of earth. In the sense of something made from earth, something of the ground, organic matter. In Roman legal language, homo was often used specifically to refer to a slave. A free man, a person with legal rights and standing, was called vir. That's where we get the words virile and virtue, qualities associated with free men. But homo was a lower category, a thing of the earth, property. Now the second word, sapiens. We're taught this means wise or intelligent, and in later philosophical Latin, it did take on that meaning. But the root of sapiens is the verb sapio, and if you look up sapio, in a complete Latin dictionary, the primary meanings are very different. Sapio means to taste, to have flavor, to smell of something. It's a culinary term. Something that is sapiens is something that has taste, that is flavorful. By extension, it came to mean having good taste or discernment, which eventually metaphorically became wisdom. But the original literal meaning is clear. Sapiens means tasty, flavorful, possessing qualities that appeal to the palate. Put it together. Homo sapiens, tasty earthling, flavorful organic matter. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is etymology. This is what the words actually mean in the language they come from. And once you understand this, certain historical moments take on a completely different significance. Consider the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. In the Gospel of John, Pilate presents Jesus to the crowd and says, "Ecce homo." This is universally translated as "behold the man," often with a tone of pity or irony. But Pilate was a Roman, official applying Roman law. His job was to determine the legal status of the accused. Was this person a Roman citizen who had certain protections under law? Or was he something else, something without those protections? By declaring ecce homo, Pilate wasn't expressing sympathy. He was pronouncing a legal judgment. Behold the slave. This person is a homo, not a vir. He has no legal standing. He can be executed without trial. The crowd understood. That's why they accepted the verdict. Pilate had determined that Jesus was legally property, not a person with rights, and property could be disposed of as the state saw fit. If we apply this understanding to the modern use of the term human, a chilling picture emerges. Every time you identify yourself as human, every time you check a box that says human being or fill out a form asking for your species, you are legally identifying yourself as homo, as something made of earth, as organic property. This is why human rights and civil rights are different categories in law. Human rights apply to homo, to the slave class. They are the minimum protections granted to property to ensure it remains functional. Civil rights apply to citizens, the plebeian class, slightly higher but still subject to state authority. Neither category possesses true sovereignty. Neither is truly free in the way that a Roman patrician was free, or in the way that natural law suggests a living man or woman should be. We are livestock. Sophisticated, self-managing livestock, but livestock nonetheless. We are resources to be used. And the evidence is everywhere once you understand the code. Look at how governments measure their success. Gross domestic product, productivity, employment rates. These are metrics for managing a farm, not for serving a free population. The state doesn't exist to protect your rights. It exists to extract maximum value from you. Taxation isn't a civic duty. It's harvest. When the government takes 30, 40, 50% of your labor, what's the difference between that and the traditional arrangement where a slave gave the master the products of their labor and received a portion back for sustenance? There is no difference. The only thing that's changed is the percentage and the rhetoric. You are allowed to keep enough to survive, to reproduce, to continue being productive. Everything else is extracted. And if you resist, if you refuse to pay, the state uses force. They seize your property. They garnish your wages. They imprison you. just as a master would punish a disobedient slave. The symbols told us this. The fasces, the symbol of state authority to beat and execute. The scales, the symbol of weighing and valuing property. The robes, the symbol of the master class separating itself from the owned. The documents told us this. The birth certificate creating a bonded entity. The all-caps name identifying that entity but corporate property. The citizenship oath binding you to eternal servitude. The language told us this. Homo sapiens, the designation of tasty organic matter. Emancipation, the transfer from one owner to another. Liberty, the permission granted to property to move within certain boundaries. Everything has been in plain sight. We just didn't have the knowledge to understand what we were looking at. We were taught to see freedom where there was only the management of servitude. We were taught to see rights where there were only privileges that could be revoked. And the ultimate proof that this analysis is correct comes from a simple test. Try to leave. Try to exist outside the system. You cannot renounce your citizenship without being accepted by another state. You cannot exist as a stateless person. If you try, you'll be detained, deported, or imprisoned. The system will not allow you to simply opt out. You cannot refuse to use the all-caps legal name. Every government document, every contract, every official interaction requires it. If you try to insist on a different form of your name, you'll be denied service. The legal fiction is mandatory. You cannot refuse to be registered. Births must be reported. Children must be assigned numbers for tax and identification purposes. Adults must carry identification. Living off-grid, outside of official records, is increasingly impossible and in many places illegal. You cannot truly own property. Even if you buy land outright, you must pay property taxes. If you stop paying, the state will take the land. You're not an owner, you're a tenant. The state is the landlord, and rent is due in perpetuity. You cannot keep the full product of your labor. Income taxes are automatic. Sales taxes are unavoidable. Regulatory fees, licensing requirements, permits for basic activities, all of these extract value from your work and give it to the state. In every meaningful way, you are not free. You are managed. You are a resource. You are property. And the system maintains this arrangement through one simple trick. It convinced you that the legal fiction created in your name is you. It convinced you that being human means being subject to state authority. It convinced you that citizenship is a privilege rather than a binding contract you never consciously agreed to. The Romans understood something that modern people have forgotten. There are two kinds of law: natural law, which applies to free men and women, and statutory law, which applies to legal fictions and property. Natural law recognizes inherent rights that cannot be legislated away. Statutory law creates obligations that exist only because a government wrote them down. A free person operates under natural law. They have the right to life, liberty, and property because those rights are inherent to being alive. They cannot be taxed for simply existing. They cannot be regulated in victimless activities. They cannot be compelled to serve the state. A legal fiction operates under statutory law. It exists only because the state created it. It has only the rights and obligations the state assigns to it. It can be taxed, regulated, and compelled without limit because it has no natural existence, only a legal one. The all-caps name on your birth certificate is that legal fiction. And every time you sign that name, every time you present identification bearing that name, every time you accept that name as your identity, you are volunteering to act as the representative of that fiction. You are stepping out of natural law and into statutory jurisdiction. This is why the system always asks for your consent, not because they respect your freedom, but because under the ancient principles that even tyrants acknowledge, slavery must be voluntary to be legally binding. You must agree to be bound. And you do every day in 1,000 small ways because you don't know the difference between you and the legal fiction. The question is, what do you do with this knowledge? Some people, when they learn this, become what's called sovereign citizens. They refuse to use the all-caps name. They challenge jurisdiction in court. They try to operate outside the system entirely. Most of them end up in jail. This isn't because their analysis is wrong. It's because the system doesn't care whether you understand it or not. The system has guns. It has prisons. It has the full weight of institutional force behind it. Understanding that you're a slave doesn't automatically make you free when the slave master is still holding the whip. But knowledge is still power, even if that power is limited. Once you understand the structure, you can navigate it differently. You can see the contracts before you sign them. You can recognize when you're being asked to consent to something that binds the legal fiction, not your living self. You can't escape the system entirely, not in the current world, but you can stop volunteering for more than is absolutely necessary. You can stop identifying as the legal fiction when you have a choice. You can start distinguishing between what is truly mandatory and what is simply assumed. More importantly, you can teach others. The system relies on ignorance. It relies on people not understanding the difference between a living man and a legal person, between natural rights and civil privileges, between human and citizen. Every person who wakes up to this reality is one less person who will blindly follow orders, pay taxes without question, or accept that government authority is natural and unchallengeable. This isn't a call to revolution. Violent resistance against this system is exactly what it wants. It gives them an excuse to deploy the full force symbolized by the fasces, the rods, and the axe, the right to beat and execute. This is a call to awareness, to seeing the cage even if you can't immediately escape it, to understanding that the freedoms you think you have are actually permissions granted by a structure that views you as property. The Roman Empire never fell. It evolved. It became more sophisticated, more subtle, more total. It turned visible chains into invisible ones. It turned slave masters into elected officials. It turned whips into tax codes and prison cells. But it's still Rome. It's still the same structure of patricians and plebeians, of free men and slaves, of those who rule and those who are ruled. And the evidence was always there, in the symbols on the government buildings, in the words of the laws, in the format of your name on every official document you've ever seen, all caps, the mark of the legal fiction, the identifier of property, the sign that you are homo sapiens, tasty earthling, resource, asset, slave. Look at your driver's license one more time. Look at that name in all capital letters. Now you know what you're looking at. The question is, what are you going to do about it?